Okay, Christof, welcome. Cheers.
Hey
Welcome to the
Sam,
show.
thanks for
Thanks
having me.
for doing
Cheers.
this. I really appreciate it. Yeah, rock and roll, man. You're coming to us off of a launch of something that's pretty exciting, but you have been a founder type since about the time I was born. So I'm very excited to get all of the wisdom from someone who's been doing this longer than I've been breathing. So I'm very excited to learn by osmosis and hear your story, Christoph. So I know you've got a lot recently, but I hope you'll take the patience to walk us through, the story and try to learn those tough lessons ahead of time, which I'm not sure if it's actually possible, but we'll try.
Well, thanks for having me, Sam. And it sounds horrible if you say that, but yes, I've been around the block, and it has upsides and it also has downsides. So I share what I can, and there's some recurring patterns which I think surely timeless and valuable. But there's also things I have to learn because things change all the time, and everyone has their own way to do things. And I think your podcast is a great platform so that everyone can kind of tap into those experiences and then just pick and choose what's right for you.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah. So maybe take us to the beginning. You had a lot of very interesting stuff going on. You were in the meat of the 90s, during the original 90s boom of tech. So I'm curious if you see some rhyming with that going on that maybe has happened recently. But maybe take us through those early days. What was it that drew you in? What were those first projects that you got involved in?
Sure. Maybe just from the background where I'm today, I'm the founder and CEO at Hornet, and we most recently launched a new product called Queer Spaces, which has just on Pride Sunday on the 26th of June been featured in the Apple App Store as App of the Day, representing really what the queer community is doing. And community has been a big part of my life, and technology has been a big part of my life, and entrepreneurship. I think these words you'll hear quite a lot when I share a little bit the background where I'm coming from. So I come originally from Germany. That explains my funny accent. And I've been here in the United States now for 20 years and live in San Francisco with my now husband of a 25-year partner. And originally in Germany, I come from a solid, I would say, middle-class background. But I'm not coming from a particularly privileged background when it comes to financial opportunity. And for me, technology has always been a way to kind of, get access to resources and do things that I wasn't otherwise able to get access to because, my daddy doesn't work in whatever oil and gas company. Someone high up the ranks. So technology has given me that sort of especially back in the days when, it wasn't as popular as today. I was coding when I was 11. I had a Commodore 64 serial number 525, bought it from some GI on a US air base in Germany. And, it always gave me sort of the freedom to do whatever I wanted. And that's been together with entrepreneurship and doing things, also a theme. So I started in the 90s, as you say, these are fossil ages, and before the even dot-com bust, my first company. I originally studied actually architecture. I felt I needed a degree because that's what Germans do, and I got a master in architecture. But actually doing these studies, I needed to kind of pay for my day-to-day living. And so I ended up coding for architects during my studies. And by the time I graduated, I started my first company building software for architects. So I had the domain knowledge. What I didn't have was any even slightest clue how to run a company. And I paid dearly for that. But in some ways, it's also good. My best qualification was my ignorance. And, don't be afraid that you say, I can't do it. You learn it on the go. What you do need, though, is a high level of pain tolerance. I mean, there were really literally months and months of nights when I didn't know how to make payroll. And in hindsight, I can say that. And I don't want to necessarily go back, but it also has formed me a lot. I was lucky in terms of timing because, the company grew nicely in late 99. I was approached by some of the .com companies to be acquired, and that allowed me an exit there. And that gave me the financial freedom I needed to do things that I wanted. One of them, after my earnout, to go to the US and get my MBA here in California. And we also stayed, both of us, here in the US since.
Wow, that's a great. Let me just quick comment there. That's a great sign of humility as someone after a huge exit. It's like, hey, I have a lot more to learn here. So that's very interesting.
It was kind of head scratching. Are you an entrepreneur? Are you an architect? And the answer was probably more an entrepreneur. You have I like the creativity of an architect, but in many ways, as an entrepreneur, you have many more degrees of freedom. Now you own it, as in all the responsibility comes with it. But I enjoyed the freedoms I had, especially in technology, where you don't have to necessarily marshal so many, gatekeepers. Let's put it this way. In the end of the day, you can do a lot with very little. At least back in the days, and still today, with somewhat little capital. So at Stanford, my MBA, I focused on open source business models, which in 2003, that was just about the time Google went public, was still a bit scratching the head. How do you make money with open source beyond like a service model? And I focused on the various monetization and production schemes, if you will, that emerged around open source communities. So here's the word community. That's also a leitmotif in what I do. And I then started my second company here in the US, an embeddable NoSQL database. It wasn't called NoSQL at the time. It was called an object database native to Java. But it was an open source distributed and produced database product that was not a relational database for those who are technical, very technical product, embeddable product, tough business, embeddable software, but also exciting to work with Boeing, putting the software in their aircraft, Spanish high-speed trains. And then China Mobile came to us and say, there's this new operating system for smartphones. We want to work with you on it. And no one on the planet has any clue how to work with very small device data management except you. And that operating system was Android. So we got into the sort of very early on into the Android.
Wow.
But the stack, the actual original sort of launch of Android. And that company did decently well. I was able to ultimately sell that company to a Japanese company. And I could then focus in 2010 onwards on the app economy, which was a very new thing. I felt like in the long run, the China Mobiles and OEMs of this world would probably not play the major part of smartphone, let's say the smartphone ecosystem, but become more or less, device manufacturers and pipes. And I knew the value would ultimately sort of bubble to the top and lie in the hands of content and app producers. That was around the time when I started Hornet. I was actually, as a daytime job and part of my merger deal, I started to set up a venture fund that invested in various apps, because that's kind of what people do after two exits, right?
Sure.
But I'm not really I like the venture investment, but it's a bit like a music critique, right? So you see people making music, and then you just write a check and tell them whether they're good or bad. But I really want to make music myself. So I'm more a builder, that's probably my shortcoming. So I did invest as part of the merger agreement. I did some notable investments like in App Annie and KeepSafe, but I also felt I needed to build something. So on this side, as a gay man myself, I felt there was just a need for, just broadly speaking, a better gay app than that was on offer at the time, which was only Grindr. And which for me as a man in a long-term relationship was like too sexual, too toxic, not social enough, and didn't really foster community. So that was a very broad, not very specific way to think about it, but we said, let's give it a shot. I knew a thing or two about building stuff. And as history happened, Hornet is today one of the, I would say, 4 remaining large gay apps, I should say, focused on the male queer community. Next to it, Grindr, Scruff, Blue D in China, and ourselves. We have 2.5 million monthly active users, a solidly profitable business, and is market leading in many markets around the world. It's not very strong in the United States, but it's
in France, right? It's one of your largest markets. Right?
Turkey, it's Indonesia, it's Russia, wild places. Brazil,
Russia,
yes,
really?
yeah, that's a whole story in its own. Taiwan, Thailand is actually our largest user country. And so it's about 16, 17 markets where we are really everything queer.
That's fascinating. And that's probably a really interesting way to think about it. It's like, hey, not all gay folks are single. Like, where's the other stuff? Yeah, that's really interesting. So I gotta ask about Russia. What has there been any fall? I mean, how do you deal with current situation there? I mean, and even accessing that market, and just ongoing day-to-day stuff, and then how did it change? I'm just super curious.
So yeah, that's kind of what you deal with, sort of on it. When you are out there in many markets and operate a business of that footprint, Russia was obviously, no one really expected ultimately that this war would happen, and the very immediate sanctions that followed, which led us immediately also to declare we would stop monetizing in Russia. But we felt we didn't want to penalize the LGBTQ community over there, because obviously, all things equal, they're probably rather the ones that we want to put our money on for the future and the long term, rather than also penalizing and stopping the conversation. We also actually have a very large market in the Ukraine. In addition, we have 8 team members in the Ukraine and 2 in Russia. So that needs to be managed too, which is managed. So we have managed to bring everyone into safety, and also between the 2 communities managed to create at least some level of bridge building. I mean, there's a reason why Putin blocks Facebooks, right? Because he doesn't want to see certain truth, I guess, percolating. I think it's censorship. And the fact that we are accessible to Russian queer people, we believe is also a force for good. But on the flip side, as a business person, that meant a 7-figure amount just disappears overnight. And that's not the kind of money or things that you expect. And this was actually quite a high grossing market for us. But, we had to find a contingency plan, and we nearly ironed out that revenue loss with other revenue plans.
Yeah, wow. I mean, I think that decision, how you approach that, says quite a bit. That's fascinating. You just quickly demonetize because of sanctions, but say, hey, look, you can still use this, and we're after the long term here. I think that's wonderful. So you went through a lot of history pretty quick there. And I think at the beginning you referenced, I really liked coding, didn't really know how to run a business. Tell me, and maybe tell the folks that may have been in your shoes then, what were some of those hard lessons learned in terms of, how to think about stickiness with clients, how to think about strategic positioning, how to manage a team? Tell me a little bit about that, how to deal with investors without losing your shirt or your face. Maybe tell us about some of those hard lessons early on that turned you into the operator that you are now.
I mean, there's just about everything you mentioned, right? I had to learn everything. I was 23, and there wasn't kind of that level of like resources today that's available in terms of incubators, startup weekends, of course, all the online resources and something like a safe agreement how to raise money. I haven't heard the word venture capital until 3 years after founding my company. That didn't exist. So there was like, what's this? How do you spell that? So back then you basically spend what you earned, right? So that was kind of a very old-fashioned style. So even the idea of that you raise capital was, obviously we had to raise capital, we had to build something before selling it, but I thought the moment we sell, that's it, and then we just kind of pay our bills. Obviously that's not quite how it works, so you need to understand a little better how financial sort of longer-term planning is. And I think, one of the hard lessons learned is just it always takes longer and always costs more. whenever you see something, you can always safely say it always takes longer and always costs more. Maybe that's just me, but in some ways, having your head around that and be ready for that, I think, builds a level of resilience. And, when we just chatted prior to this recording, I'm an endurance athlete, so my pain tolerance is very high. So, I do 100K, like 62, 63 miler runs, like through the high Sierra. I went to Mount Whitney 2 weeks ago. In a one-day trip, round trip. And, this is kind of the thing that is my nature. It's painful, yes, and you breathe through a straw when you're up there at this altitude. But it's also, if it doesn't kill you, it makes you harder. So there's a bit of that in there that you need to be ready for it. And I think if you get a mental, if you set your expectations right, I think it carries you through all these things that are thrown at you, which are from everywhere, right? Your most devoted early customer, I remember the first one that kind of triggered me to start this software for architects. There was a friend of the architect I was coding for. He came in and said, "What you're doing is awesome. I want this too." I said, "Great. Here's my first customer. I'm going to launch the company." He was probably the only customer ever that never used the software nor paid for it. But he was the guy who brought me into the business, so I believed that he would actually like it, and it was very disappointing. In fact, I had recruited initially. I felt like maybe that's another lesson. I felt like I didn't know anything about sales, and there was a guy who kind of had business experience, and I was like, I came right out of university, with architecture. So I said, I need someone who has done this before. And the moment this first customer said like, "Oh, I'm not going to pay, and I don't like your software at all," he immediately left me. so that was not a very high level of pain tolerance. And then, you sometimes you just gotta, more longer than you think, you have to do it yourself. I'm not sure. This is just a ramble. I don't think there's this one thing, but I think just be ready. Yeah. Have the support system from your partner, mentally, that you're right. I personally, maybe it's just my nature. I don't burn down my last candle, so I always have a little bit of safety net, also financially. I never owned the majority of my companies. I always took in shareholders from the get-go in every single company. I never owned more than 50%. So I was always on multiple shoulders. That's very interesting. That's a de-risking. I'm not sure that this answers your question, but it's just a little bit of window into my mind at this point, at this question.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. We started to make that change here at the studio. Initially we're like, man, we want to, because we've got a lot of people here in the studio staff, and it's like, let's take whatever interest the market will give us. But I think we're realizing now that taking a little bit less, sharing the pie a lot more, allows us to focus on the work that we enjoy doing a little bit more, and you've got more partners that are able to help you out. So I think, that's very interesting to me. So one of the things I heard that's always stuck with me is that it's not obvious that we're able to identify the things that we're able to make us do really well, but it's a lot easier to figure out the things that really hurt. So it's a lot easier to figure out our mistakes than it is what made it work really well. So maybe tell me about some of those big mistakes early on that come to mind.
Yes, in many ways, you live to fight another day, right? So that's kind of, and then somehow, and that's the reality also in every one of my companies. You start with a plan, and not every plan pans out as you planned. I think it's probably going to be the most entertaining thing if most entrepreneurs take out their first pitch 10 years later and look at it, and they're probably going to crack up laughing, because you obviously will, and hopefully modify that pitch based on feedback from investors, from your market, from your team, and just how the market has evolved. So I don't necessarily say that is a mistake, but definitely it's always important to stay and humble and agile, and incorporate that feedback. sometimes I was maybe not confident enough about my entrepreneurial chops, especially early on. So I sometimes brought in hired guns, let's say this way, that I thought would kind of bring that sort of experience, and it was always often surprising how little that has actually worked out. So, but that's maybe my style. I don't know, but usually that hasn't worked out for me that well. So I have quite a long list of things where someone who is not willing to be a co-entrepreneur would really pan out. I also felt, generally speaking, developing talent from in-house is often, for the specific things we do, there's simply no other company like us. It was, always also a good move for us. And again, as I said, someone who had the credentials from XYZ often turned out to be not as good a fit for us. So that's been definitely a big mistake that I've done a couple of times.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think it's very easy to get lured into kind of the prestige of certain folks. I know that a lot of folks that you want to hire, it's like, man, the rainmakers, that may do some dancing, but the rain doesn't come, and it's always painful.
One side, right? That's painful, but also the effect on the others who are in the company and say, now this guy comes with all this sort of this resume, and and the rain should come. The rain doesn't come, but the salary and the compensation is still there, like it were. That of course frustrates also everyone around. So I just had this a couple of times.
Yeah, that's a tough one. So tell me about, you've been racking up all this experience doing this entrepreneurial stuff, and come a long way since buying that old machine off an army guy. Tell me about the early days of Hornet, or whatever it was before it became Hornet. Tell me about when you first kind of saw, hey, there might actually be something that I could spend some time doing.
Yeah, so initially in 2011 we started Hornet. It was literally a side gig, so my daytime job was investing, and a couple of friends, we came together and said, let's do it on the side. A couple of people here in the Castro, and we just put some money down, found some developers. I mean, how difficult could it be to build an app? Obviously, the answer is much more difficult than you think. And that was 10 years ago, and today it's like massive if you think about bots and compliance. And I mean, it's just massive. I don't envy anyone who starts I feel a lot of pity if you have to start a new app and build a new brand in the App Store today. Back then it was much easier. So we did have legs. Probably back then just the keyword gay or queer got you already into the top 10 search results just by having it. There was just not so much in the App Store. Right. And then once you, of course, have a certain amount of brand recognition, we have about 20,000 downloads a day, and we spend exactly zero on marketing. It's just a consumer brand among queer people worldwide. And especially in the markets we're strong at. But this is like, who has 20,000 organic downloads just a day, right? So, there are, of course, others that do, but we are not, Facebook or TikTok, right? So, that really helped us. Now over.
So how do you get that flywheel started? I'm sure it's hard to know exactly, but I mean, what do you think it was that helped propel it forward? Obviously, extreme focus on the integrity of the brand is something that a lot of people can do, but how do you get that initial set of attention for people to appreciate that and then make it kind of infectious? What were some of the early decisions that you guys took to make that happen?
The answer from 10 years, the experience from 10 years ago probably doesn't apply at all today. But I can relate to it because we launched a new app, our second or the next generation of queer app, which is Spaces, which is a new app that I mentioned just got featured by Apple as App of the Day globally, US wide, but in the entire App Store on Pride Day, Stonewall Day, June 26th, and that's just been out 120 days. So how do you get there? Now, of course, we had a little bit of an unfair advantage that Hornet is been around for a long time. So we're not just showing up like completely greenhorn. So there's some credibility and also some experience. If you open the app, right, just the basics are there, right? So it's I think it's very beautiful. It's pixel perfect. It works. It doesn't look like, completely, there is a level of sort of also haptic experience to it. And I think all of this, of course, conducive to the brand as well. Back then, literally, it was really, there was just having an app with certain keywords would already get you a lot of exposure. Today, that doesn't cut the bill. So today we are following, in fact, it's mandatory reading. And in fact, anyone who thinks about network product should read The Cold Start Problem. It's Andrew Chen's book. And it's nothing in there is particularly groundbreaking. I mean, this is like, what I've been taught at B school for quite a big tuition. You can save that money right there. But also my personal insights and many things I would repeat. And actually, we have done some of these things exactly the same way. So the Cold Start Problem book tells you how to start up a ghost town, right? How do you get this started? And if this product, and as this product relies on network effects, then it's particularly difficult because either it's a two-sided network, so it's a marketplace where you have like Uber, a driver and a passenger. You need to fire up both sides at the same time, which is true for our Spaces product. Our Spaces product is basically a platform where community builders can organize groups around interests they're passionate about, and think of it like a queer Discord. So it's basically a way to say, okay, I'm interested in queer gardening and plants and gardening with queer people, or watching Star Wars, or thinking about transgender support fund. And they basically, these people that are passionate about community and the topics that bring us together, they can fire up a space. They set the moderation, the kind of ground rules, and it's a group chat based app. So this has been for us, of course, a two-sided market. So we have to have hosts and we have to have the users, of course, and the hosts are the more important ones, because if they don't nurture these spaces, then the spaces become very useless. So without going into too much detail, initially you have to be very humble and really hustle your way, sometimes Flintstone your way. So we all are also members of these spaces to keep the conversation going. And not only has Andrew Chen written this very nicely in the book, but he actually interviews and shows the showcase of one of the apps that has launched this way. And the founder of that app is an advisor and now also early investor in Spaces, who is Sean Rad, the founder of Tinder. Tinder started famously on USC campus in Los Angeles, and they threw a $100,000 house party and required everyone to download Tinder. Now, that is not a user acquisition cost you can really sustain, can you? But it gets the first cluster going. Everyone had to go, and then suddenly others were there, and boom, it went on. And then they could repeat it in another college. Even if it's not scalable, initially you have to eat humble pie and hustle and Flintstone, as they call it, like, make it look like a car with wheels, though it's actually just rock. And all this is described actually in the book of Andrew Chen, who I have no financial interest in, but I just think it's brilliant because it really puts all these concepts together.
I think that's fantastic. So tell me, once you're seeing a little bit of that coming together with Hornet, what was it exactly that made you think that the time was right to launch a separate but similar product that's more focused on specific community there? I think you made the reference to Discord, which is very interesting because you get right into the meat of a particular community, whatever it is, and it sounds like that's a big corollary there. So tell me, if you would, a little bit about how you guys thought through that transition and any sort of cannibalism as you guys thought through that, because in hindsight, it seems obvious, but when you're doing it,
decision,
it's
right? You got to go
terrifying.
in some ways go back to the drawing board. The one thing that has been consistent at Hornet from the foundation is that we wanted to create a better place where queer people are celebrated for who they are, right? Because I do believe this being member of this community is a huge asset. It's nothing. Ideally, you have to, first of all, for yourself, you don't have to and should be, but hopefully you don't need to think of it as something, there's something wrong with you or there's a defect. I've actually experienced the more I leaned into it and myself, the stronger I became, the more authentic I became, the more I could leverage my resources. I sometimes famously make, or not famously, but make this joke, and probably some people roll their eyes, but when you apply to Stanford B School, they say, what do you care about most, or something like this. I forgot the exact title. It's a famous essay. And I basically played the gay card and say, I'm gay. And in 2003, that wasn't necessarily the majority of queer people at the B school that would be openly gay. And, I said, like, look, this is who I am. If you reject me because of who I am, then I don't want to be part of your club in the first place. But if you accept me for who I am, then I'm already starting on the right terms. So in some ways, and that's just one episode of the many things. Like if you have the support system and the confidence, which of course comes from family, friends, community, to feel comfortable and also protected against attacks when you become vulnerable, then you can lean into your identity, and then it becomes a source of strength and differentiation, and you are sought after. So it's not anything that takes anything away from you. In fact, it strengthens who you are. And I'm saying this from now the comparatively privileged, quite privileged position of a white gay male who lives in San Francisco, socioeconomically well off. I'm healthy and I'm in a partnership, and so on and so forth. So now think about people who do not sort of have all of these privileges, and then how we as a community can support, right? And you need that support system, that you embrace who you are, a place where you're celebrated, and then you can lean into this, and that actually makes you stronger in everything you do. So that has been a mission that's been consistent in my life, that has been foundational at Hornet. We said there needs to be a better place where community exists online. It was a very vague mission, but actually very clear. It's a better place than the other alternatives. And the step to then move forward was basically an insight. We added more and more social features to the Hornet product, which are, for instance, live streaming video, ephemeral videos. We have a very strong feed. We have a big newsroom, so we curate and also create original content around important topics pertaining to the queer community, whether it's political or entertainment or sports or culture. And all these things really work to kind of create a sort of, a more inclusive place and more ways to connect than just, oh, I really like your face or your body size or something like this. It's just physical. But it ended up being confined to queer male audiences, and ultimately that kind of keeps it always somewhat on the dating side of the house, because why do you exclude lesbians or demisexual or pansexuals? Not necessarily exclude them, but they wouldn't feel comfortable in that environment. So we felt this hasn't really been done, because all the queer apps, no matter whether they're more female lesbian focused or more male gay focused at sort of as a big picture gravity, they're in the end of the day about mating and dating. And we felt there needs to be the equivalent of a Castro, which is, hopefully, or in fact, even, what Generation Z, like an inclusive community where everyone can define, their own sort of identity, their sexuality, their gender in a way that fits for them. And they're celebrated for that. And that needs to be sort of a spectrum, a continuum. And sort of a one-on-one network doesn't work this way. We needed this kind of, this multifaceted sort of spaces. And we needed to ultimately empower people to kind of define for themselves what those spaces need to look like. The social format around that became group chat because it's so widely adopted. Everyone uses group chat. No one needs really an explanation for that. It's a low barrier to chat or to comment on a chat or react to a chat component, right? Unlike, let's say, video, where you need to be much sleeker and more polished. And so we said we give it a shot. And luckily, we got very good advice, and we had the capabilities to execute on it. And it went off to a really good start. So it's doing really, really well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I got to tell you that the depth and quality of some of the GMs, even when it is apparently just talking about nothing or being dumb, but it feels to, I think, use some of your that phrasing is, it feels like a huge asset to have that community at your back that you spend all this time with, that you have this long history with, and the support, I think, is amazing. The way I hear you talk about a community, it seems like almost the number one goal is all revolving around building these people up and becoming an asset for them, right? And I think that's just fundamentally different than social media as we see it now, which is eyeballs, and I think you're really after quality and support framework that you're able to provide these folks, and I think that's very interesting.
I think that's true. I'm not saying this sounds altruistic, and it is. But I also think it's good business. I think you want to create a trusted place where you feel, they have your back. Because you mentioned heteronormative social media. They just throw us and our community under the bus the moment they see $1. They just don't care. I mean, they will definitely gladly wrap their headquarters and logos in rainbow flags, but that's about it. When there's $1 on the line, they will clearly go where the dollar is, no matter what it is. So, and I'm not just saying this as a sort of just broad statement. There is no one less than GLAAD, the biggest and most renowned advocacy group for queer and queer people in the United States, and they just published last week the second edition of their newly formed Social Media Safety Index. Last year was the first year, and in both years, 64% of queer adult Americans have been subject to online harassment and discrimination on the big 5 social media platforms, which is Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube. 64%, and this is not a sort of kind of a race to the bottom. For African Americans, the number is 44%, just to give an example and so on. So it's the highest number of respondents have been subject to harassment based on being queer, number one, and the only one where more than half the people responded that way. And that number has gone up from 64 to 66% last year, so it's not getting any better. It's getting worse. We had a similar study, not quite the same format, in 2018, and the number was about 40%. So it's kind of a paradox that in some way, society is clearly getting more accepting. I mean, we know the approval, rates for same-sex marriage have gone up quite a lot, and marriage equality. But at the same time, these attacks, these harassment incidents go up. And the answer of that is, of course, very simple. It's our society is getting very polarized. Yeah, our society is much more polarized than it used to be, and we know that from politics. Right? And so you have less attacks, but they are much more harmful and more vicious and have a much bigger blast radius. So sometimes I make this example that, you don't need 50% of the passengers on an airplane to be terrorists to cause real harm. One is enough, and it can be very, very painful. So it depends on how lethal or how sort of, destructive that attack is. And those attacks have become more lethal. And here now, of course, goes back to the responsibility of these platforms. They have to stop it, but they don't. They don't care. In fact, they live from outrage because that means more clicks.
Absolutely.
Right? and that makes them more money. So they're simply not going to go this way. And we promise, and that I think is a business promise, we walk away from $1 or we ban a user from our platform if they don't concur with the very basic standards of our community, which is acceptance, tolerance, and inclusiveness. And we just don't accept it. And that's also true for the business side of us. We are going to walk away from that $1 if needed. And that's who we are.
Yeah. I mean, I don't envy those, senior Facebook or executives or whoever. I mean, try to go to the room of the shareholders and say, hey, look, I work for you, but I'm going to try to, decrease our exposure here because I see long-term benefit over the next 30 years. I mean, good luck. I mean, it's just built on a shaky foundation. But if you build it like you said, I don't know. I see it very difficult.
Losing users, sorry. And why? Because people don't trust it in many ways, right? So I don't think it's more short-term versus long-term. And you see also quite a difference in the way, let's say, an Apple, a Google, and a Facebook respond to some of these challenges. I can give you examples, for instance, how in Turkey, where we are also a very big and large market for us, we are basically lasting gay there. Grindr is completely blocked. Pride has been dismantled. All gay bars are closed. The only thing that's still running is Hornet. This is really the operating system there. That's the only way for queer people to find one another. And I should say it's the male queer people mostly. Simply that society is kind of at that level. But of course, that's the mission cut out right there. So then the Turkish government, of course, continued to try to suppress queer voices all the time, not only forbidding Pride and, journalists are locked up and so on, but they and forcing the big ones like Twitter and YouTube to kind of take down certain content that is immoral. You know how those pressures work. And among them, they trumped up a phony court case that somehow someone's privacy rights were infringed because someone copied their profile picture and opened a profile with their picture, which, as you may know, happens like gazillion million times on social media every single day. But of course, that's a personality right infringement under Turkish law. And then the court ordered, and that person, by the way, was a policeman in the Ankara Internet Security Police. So that person then sued at the court where we weren't invited, and then the court decided, we have to shut down Hornet within a week. We weren't even heard. We heard it like way later from some filings. The ISVs, the internet was immediately blocked, and Google and Apple took two stances. Google ignored that court order. Apple, after a year, complied with the court order, took us out of the App Store, but then worked with us to reinstate us through basically building a new Turkish Hornet app and allowing that into the App Store, which is not necessarily what you would typically be permitted as an app publisher. So I just want to say, first of all, these individuals, they're actually trying to make good by the community, and it's a hard bargain for them. And, they're between a rock and a hard place in many ways. Number one. And number two, you see that some companies try way harder. And I want to give a big shout out to Apple and Google. They're trying definitely way harder there, and have, when incidences happened where there was an unfair treatment of vulnerable minorities, especially overseas, they went the extra mile to make good on that.
I think that's a very fair criticism. I mean, if you're only on a team when it's easy, then how much is that worth? Yeah, I hear you. Tell me a little bit more about how you guys are managing all of these different markets. How do you think about where you want to go next? Are you going where you think there may be an important fight that the cards are in your favor? How do you think about that strategy? And I may be kind of imparting more narrative fallacy on it than there really is, but how do you think about, like, hey, this is where we want to go next, or how do you?
Well, I mean, for us, it's all about
Queer
Spaces, the new app, which is squarely focused on the United States audience. and particularly the progressive part of our community. And that is really where we think, the puck is going, and that's where we skate. So just the recent Gallup survey has shown that 20.5% of Gen Z identify as non-binary and LGBTQ, which is up from 10% 4 years ago for that generation. And comparison, my generation, as you already mentioned, I'm quite old, it was 4% in my generation. So it's a 5-time increase over my age cohort.
Wow.
And it's not necessarily only about the dating behavior, it's an identity sort of view, right? So for my generation, it was, who do I date? And out of that span a certain identity, especially during the AIDS crisis. I think that has formed our community and the years after. The Generation Z is different. It's about them claiming their identity in sort of this sort of indifference of social media and somewhat shallowness, adding certain, just kind of reclaim and own who they are. I think may explain some of that, but it's just amazing that this is probably one of the biggest somewhat seen consumer trend, but that there's no one catering to it is just amazing. And so for us, it's the opportunity we absolutely look for. And we definitely say, what worked for queer apps, like since 2008, since the Grindr model came out and the dating-oriented piece, is not where we're going to go in the future. I think there will be a much bigger market based on community. And in many ways, I think community is the future of all things social, online community, all things social, and all things maybe even dating. And that's the opportunity for us. If we crack that nut and build that inclusiveness and a place where you feel you're celebrated and belong, and manage to convey that online, I think, this is going to be a role model also in many ways for other communities.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about, you probably have more sophisticated views on moderation of social media than just about anybody. Tell me how you think about that, because I got to imagine, as a guy who appreciates policy, how hard it is to be able to set that, and then also, have moderators at the right frame of mind while having, direct applicability, but also being able to apply it uniformly without creating, unfair treatment. So tell me a little bit how you think about that.
I think we start off from a somewhat better place as the queer community, because you would probably think there's certain things that the majority of queer community should at least agree, which are inclusiveness and tolerance. It's not always the case, unfortunately, which bewilders me, but I think, the vast majority of people, if you go to the Castro or go to Pride Parade, would, at least in theory, adhere to certain sort of common community standards, which are not necessarily shared across the entire society. So just intimacy, as Jason Citron from actually Discord said it, intimacy creates already a sort of, level, what is permissible and what's not, how do people behave. And that alone is already giving us, in many ways, by design, I say, a heads up on moderation. I do actually not envy people who have to set moderation policies at Twitter and Facebook, because yes, it is a trade-off at some stage. You have to make the decision between free speech and, where do you infringe, on other people. Within the queer community, we have somewhat a bigger common denominator, maybe because of our that being part of this. But then, of course, we have basically the spectrum from, of course, machine-supported moderation, whether it's images or text or comments, all the way to human. The core is at the margin. The more we can do with humans and devolve the responsibilities of moderation to the actual hosts of a particular space, which is yet again more intimate, the better. Reddit is doing actually a great job at this. They actually have very little centralized oversight, and they devolve a lot of decision making to the respective communities. The downside there, of course, is still they then still, they're very fragmented in that way, and some Reddits may work well, but others may be toxic pits of venom. So, and we have probably a more common bonding platform. So I think as a home for the queer community, I think we can do better there. But at the margin, we simply do a lot with volunteer moderators and staff moderators when we feel the machine learning can help us to come to a conclusion.
Well, Christof, I think that's fantastic. I'm a big fan of your work. I think you've done some incredible stuff here, and I think a lot of people like to think of themselves as using tech to make a difference, but I think you really have, and it's apparent how many people have been impacted by the work you've done. Maybe as a final comment here, where do you think this movement, or yourself, or Spaces is going to go in the future? What's that next?
So I do believe that there's an opportunity to build basically the online operating system for the queer community, ultimately worldwide. And it's by empowering those people who are passionate about the community and passionate about certain things within the community, to give them a way to safely and easily sort of create that space, acquire users that are, share the interests, share the way they look at sort of the community and what it can do for each one of us. Basically using technology and entrepreneurship to fix what's the problem. And I think that's entrepreneurship, right? So a problem is a problem, but then it's also an opportunity. And I think something very big will be built here. The aggregate number of daily active users between the sort of more traditional queer apps that are dating focused is anywhere between 6 and 10 million daily active users worldwide. But there's between 400 million and 1.2 billion queer people worldwide. So it's a very tiny portion that are actually dating at a given day over the entire lifetime, whereas community and social is something you do every single day, in and out, from cradle to grave, so to speak, whether you're partnered or not, and for various different things in your life, whether it's career building, whether it's entertainment, whether it's sports. So I think the use cases for social and a socially oriented community are also much, much bigger and more frequent than dating oriented platforms. So I think a very big company will be built, and I hope it's us. If it's not us, it's still the second best, because I need this platform for our community. And whoever wins, I wish them all best luck, and I hope it's us.
True champion. Thank you, Chris.